We're doing very basic I/O. I see a couple of new faces. Welcome. If you need to get caught up on anything, you'll have to talk to me later, and I'll be glad to tell you anything you're curious about. But I/O, well, we've got the basics as of 5.10. We have say. Say will output to standard output, whatever you've got, and put a new line after it. And it's 2 characters shorter than print. And instead of having to say to standard error, if you just want something to go to standard error, we have note. Goes to standard error with a new line. And we also have built-in now, similar to Damian Conway's IO:prompt module from Perl, just prompt. You say prompt, it asks on the terminal the question and takes the input and puts it in your variable. Very convenient. You can slurp a whole file into a scalar or get it line by line by using lines on an I/O handle. Now, I don't have this worded very well, but it's worth explaining a little better. In Perl and in most languages, and in Raku too, we've got open, right? So you've got a string that represents a path, a file name. It's just a string, but it describes, it points you to a file. And you do open to get a file handle that then you can do stuff on the contents of that file. We have file handles in Raku, and you can do an open to get a file handle. But sometimes you just want a quick and dirty. So we've got this cool thing that if you, I guess we haven't said, anytime you want to turn something into a type, you just say dot and that type. So earlier when we were doing tilde to turn a variable into a string, we also could have said variable name dot capital S TR. You change any type that way. Well, at least the basic types. I don't know if you can do that with date time. So if we do that to an I/O type, then you've got an open file handle on that path. And the lines method on an I/O file handle gives it to you line by line, lazily, unless you ask for it all at once by assigning to an array. That'll come into play hopefully later, because it's cool how you can do that lazily. The opposite of slurp is spurt. So you can slurp and spurt both have the file handle open just for the instant that it's necessary to do the operation. I don't know that it's truly atomic. I need to check that. But that's Ingy says, compared to a language where they say spit, spurt is better. So that's enough for now. And it doesn't have to be in a variable. Just a quoted string, .io.slurp, and you've got it's just great for quick and dirty stuff. But if you slurp into a scalar, you still have the new lines. If you say .lines, then you don't have the new lines. It automatically takes them out. We don't need chomp the way we did in Perl, unless you tell it very deliberately. Otherwise, all the file handles in Raku are auto-chomping. Flow control. So in Raku, this is a repeat from the sorting talk, we have separate operators for string and numeric comparisons. So even if you don't know the type of data, again, Alan, this is back to the, can you read it and know what it does? You know, based on the operator, whether it's going to be doing a comparison numerically or string-wise. It should be, the action you're taking should be clear to the reader. Your action is more important than the type. If that's not true, then you use generics. We do have generic versions of these now. I don't know if I have them. Anyway, Perls generally follow the view that different semantics mean different operators. So you know how your program will behave. No question that equals means numeric equality and EQ means string equality, or that plus is addition, like some languages where plus, if those things are strings, you can't tell it while you're reading it, but that's supposed to be concatenation. You can't tell when reading a line of code whether it's doing concatenation or addition. That's a bad design. My humble opinion. So, probably should be a different slide, but we've deconfused a few things from Perl 5. I see. It should be on the same slide. Under the same design principle, you should know just reading the code what it does. We had a couple of places in Perl where that wasn't true. Reverse, if something's in list context, reverses the list. If it's in string context, it reverses the string. And if you try to reverse a string in list context, then you had a list of one thing, and now you have the opposite of that list of one thing, which was the list of the one thing. And it doesn't do anything, and people are confused. So those deserve to be separate operators or methods. If you're talking about the string version, it's flip. And if you want the list version, it's reverse. Similarly, the X operator does two completely different things in Perl, depending on context. And badly on context. It's like weird. I can't get into the weird syntax rule on it. It'll trip you up. If you say X on a string, then you get repetitions of the string. So ABC times 3 is ABC, ABC, ABC as one string. But if you you say X on a list, then if you had 3 elements and you're repeating 3 times, you got 9 elements. Not acceptable. So now we have the X operator and the XX operator. It's much clearer as long as you remember what the difference is. Double X, you must have multiple things, right? That's how you remember it. Our basic conditionals, nothing especially surprising, except we don't need parens anymore. Parens are perfectly legal. We just don't need them anymore. We also have unless as an opposite of if. But if I remember right, if you use unless, you can't use else if. And there's no else unless. And the ternary in Perl, it was question mark and colon. But one of the foundational rules of Raku is Larry gets the colon. It's like in the RFC process, there were just so many RFCs that came in that did something with the colon. Used the colon because it's underused in Perl. And so they wanted to use it for this, for that, for 15 different things. And the rule was Larry gets the colon. He's going to decide what that's used for. Anybody that needs it for something else, you find a different way. And he used it for adverbs, as we talked about earlier. So we got to have something different. Let's get smart. First, the question mark we've already used. Remember, it's the prefix operator to force Boolean context. So let's double it, question mark. And if we have to have something, we don't want colon, because that's package separator. Let's use bang, bang. All right, now we got a parallel. We got question marks and bangs, truth and false. Now this is all coming together, right? So this is our ternary, an expression. The thing on the left of the question marks, if it's true, then the stuff on the right of the question marks triggers. Otherwise, the stuff on the right of the exclamation triggers. So it's the complain cheer as a ternary is equivalent to the full if block there. Any questions about that? It's a bit to get used to, especially when you start chaining them. But I find it very useful. And there's an example of chaining them. This does the precedence right. If I remember correctly, if you do this in JavaScript, it will fail horribly because the precedence is all wrong. In JavaScript, you have to surround literally everything in parentheses to make this work right in JavaScript. I have a note here. Set an emoji to laugh or cry, depending on who. I don't know. This might seem a bit much. I use it a lot. Oh, this is why. Yeah, there's nothing laugh or cry about that. This is the evil one. It's just an aside. I don't even know why I put it in. I was feeling evil. The spaceship operator from the sorting talk earlier, remember it returns -1, 0, or 1. So you add 1 to it, and you've got 0, 1, or 2, which can be used as index lookup. So this does the same thing as the last slide. Anybody want that in production code? APL programmers. Good answer. Yeah. Not worth the pain, but amusing to talk about. Okay, what am I talking about here? Oh, we have postfix. I don't have it in the slide. I don't have it in my notes. Just like in Perl, we have postfix conditional, if and unless. Does anybody get the printer on fire joke? Am I really that old? It used to be that the protocol on parallel ports that printers plugged in could only assert on one pin. It didn't print. It can't tell you anything about why it didn't print. It didn't print. So on some systems, the Unixy programmers had the error message for it can't print, printer on fire. Because how would you know? Okay, this happens a lot. Lots of languages. You have a function that returns something, but it returns false if it fails. In this case, get username. Trust me, it gives you the empty string if it fails. So you write an if block conditioned on the variable that you stored it in. There's nothing wrong with that. But if the only thing you're going to use name in is that if block, right? Because anything outside the if block doesn't know whether it's defined or undefined. So all the stuff that has to do with the name has to be in the if block. But name is going to keep existing until the bottom of your scope, the bottom of your program, the bottom of your subroutine, whatever. So it's clutter. Unnecessary concern for the reader, cognitive burden. In Perl, we would do this. That's valid. It does what you want in Perl. Can I put it in a ternary block? Well, I'd have to do some magic with like a do statement in Perl, or we don't really do that so much in Raku, in order to expand the part of the ternary to have multiple statements, because I want to be able to do lots of stuff in that if block. And that'd be really ugly. Interesting thought. So we can do that. And there's some note unfinished here, marked to finish, about how the dollar name falls out of scope in that context. Anyway, we want that kind of construct, but it's against the rules in Raku. So, we've got a new rule. Blocks can take parameters. You can just parameterize block. We're going to have an if statement with a block. It can take a parameter. $name isn't going to be a variable, really. It's an alias to whatever get username returned. And if it's false, the if evaluates false and does not run. So there's nothing to alias. It just skips. If it does run, then you can treat name like it's a variable for the whole scope. Well, you see that my that struck through right there? It is implicitly defined, but it's not an implicitly defined variable. It's an implicitly defined alias. It's a read-only alias, unlike for statements in Perl where you can end up changing your original data. It defaults to a read-only alias. You can give it a type for clarity, but you don't say my, because my would be declaring a variable, not an alias. And, it doesn't apply there. Okay. We have given when, which is like a switch case statement on steroids. We can use it to get the num variable out of our previous program. So the prompt happens. Given runs the prompt. So it's the value that given's running on. It goes into $_. When, every time you see a star there, it's running on $_. And as long as you're using it in block form, it will automatically jump after it. So if the first when executes, it doesn't run the second when or the default. If the first when doesn't execute, it tries the second when. If it wins, then if it runs, then the default won't run. If none of them run, then the default runs. And I have a try it here, but we won't take time for that. In Perl, we had for without the C-style for used for infinite loop. And here, since we renamed the C-style for to loop, if you just omit all the stuff about the C-style for except the word loop, you get an infinite loop. And you can exit, you can leave out of it or as you need. Do I have this set up? Okay, I'll tell the story. When the Commodore 64 personal computers hit store shelves in my lifetime, every retailer set up a demonstration model. Like every place that sold them had a demonstration area, a TV hooked up to the Commodore 64. And every one of those Commodore 64s boots directly into the basic interpreter. There's no security. Nobody even heard of security yet. And you can just do Control-C to end whatever demo program they had running. And so every single place I ever saw them, somebody would code exactly that basic program. And, I do not have it, and I do not have a note to set it up. But what happens is, because it is, 9 characters, which does not divide evenly into an 80-column screen, you get a barbershop poll style rotation of the word bullshit over and over and over and over. There's no space at the end there, and there's no new line. I mean, not that I was ever the person who did that, but I saw it a lot. everywhere. Okay. Loop is for C-style loops, the things where you've got two semicolons, and on the left is initialization, the middle is condition to continue, and the right is an increment. That you can't get rid of that. It's just, there are situations when you do need it, but you can usually do better if you think about it. The while loop is unsurprising, except for, again, we don't need the parens. In the C-style for loop, you do have to have parens. I'm not sure what the logic on that is, but it was very, very deliberate. So we have while and until, just the opposite of while, but they still evaluate at the top. And the thing that we did with the if statement, with the arrow block, we can do that with a while statement. As long as it evaluates for true. Yeah, that's what I was just talking about. Yeah. And we're not going to do an exercise of the classic guess my number game because I'm not set up for it. Okay, for loop. By the way, did you guys know that in Perl we teach it as like for each versus for? For each is if you're iterating over a list of things, and for is for the C-style one. But it has never been true that is how it is. It's always been true that Perl ignores whether you said for each or for. It treats them completely as synonyms and looks at what comes after as to decide which kind of block it's doing. So here's an arrow block again. We're going to use for. It's no longer interchangeable because loop is the C-style. For is always iterative directly over the things. So for iterates over a collection of things. If the collection is ordered like an array, then you'll visit each element in order. If it's unordered like a hash, you will visit each element in some order that is unpredictable but is consistent. Yes?
How does it, I feel like I did something in the database thing one time. I said for, and then I tried to do some stuff in there, and it checked the first one and it threw away. I couldn't use the first element. I don't know if it was for or for each. It was something where I was grabbing all the rows, and I was kind of saying, I guess if there's anything in this array of rows you're giving me back and do this stuff, but I kept losing. The first one was never accessible.
Okay, that's in Perl. Yes. So just for the camera, for posterity, in Perl, he hit a problem where doing database access and looping in a for loop, it doesn't really matter if it was for or for each. Either the first row got dumped or it's hard to say. There are several things that can go wrong. I don't know which one it might be. Some of those you have to use while instead of for. Have to use while instead of for because it's actually we have generic iteration. I don't know if I'm going into it, but there's a whole lot of stuff that you can just treat as a list in Raku. Just even if it's not really, if it like a file handler, bumps along every time, you just treat it like a list. Whereas in Perl, if you try to use a file handle into an array, you've slurped the whole array. It's not supposed to be done that. You have to use while on a file handle to get one line at a time. Similarly, a lot of the DBI stuff, it actually has to be while and watch for the end of file. Or there are a couple other things that could have been, but I don't know off the top of my head. Sure, I didn't have a different slide for it, but I was saying if you iterate over anything that's unordered, like a hash, you will still visit every element. But the order is unpredictable, except that it is consistent. Yes, I was about to get to that. It's consistent within that run of the program. It is not necessarily consistent between runs. In fact, I don't know to what extent this is implemented in Raku, but it is deliberate in Perl. For those of you who don't remember when that happened, quick story. It used to be that unless you changed versions of Perl, like actually put in a new executable of Perl, every time you ran your program, whatever order that hash was iterated over or emitted or whatever, it would always be the same in between runs of the program. And somebody found out a way to exploit that with security. It was never quite clear to me how, but I certainly trust that it was real. So they changed it. It has to be consistent inside the program. But they put in a randomization in Perl, and it broke some code. There were people who had made assumptions that in between runs it would do the same thing, and that's unfortunate. What now? Probably test code. Yeah, you would assume that, but like deep in the bowels of financial institutions, if you emitted all the stuff about department revenues just from a hash that on one day, and then we're doing a diff against it, like an actual diff for the file next, it would, you don't have keys in the same position anymore. And that's just my first fevered imagination. I can see it. You shouldn't write that way, but people do. Okay, so again here, this is the pointy block syntax. We've got one thing, $task. So every time through, $task is going to be an alias, a read-only alias, that's safer than Perl, to whichever position in the tasks array we're in. It doesn't have to be a read-only array. I mean, it's much safer, but occasionally you actually do want to be able to change the original array as you go through it. And we can declare that with is read write. And there's a shortcut for that. I think because somebody was just being clever. So we have dash arrow to make the read-only alias. If you have back arrow, angle dash, if you add a less than, then it becomes read write. Is this really cool, or is this just too subtle for words and you'd always use read write? Who wants is read write? Okay. Anybody just really for the symbolic version? Okay. A classroom of sane people. I have used the symbol version. What if you don't alias? Then it goes into $_, like you're familiar with for Perl. But what's cool is if you say dot method on nothing, then it means do it on $_, which comes up a lot. It's just, the $_ is the topic. So if you talk about something without specifying the topic, you mean the default topic. So you can do this. Okay, remember I said we have to have the C loop, but you can usually do better. Let's look at that. We do a for loop over a range. Wait, that's backwards, right? We need to go 10 down to, okay, over a reversed range. That would also work well as a postfix for loop. And just about like everything, there's a method form. But I don't think that reads as well here. Now, if the reverse method is called on 1 to 10, does that mean that it's expanded into a list of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then reversed? No. A range is an object. This surprises people. Range is an object. We have an object type, range. And the operator, ... is a range constructor. And it has 4 variants. The plain one, but also because this comes up a lot in computing, you want to omit the left hand or the right hand or both endpoints. The old mathematics, inclusive or exclusive ranges. So we have a way to write the common ranges very succinctly. And there's a shortcut that was going to get used more, and then it turned out we got something even better, of just putting a caret in front of a number as a shortcut to mean that many things. Like I want to do this 5 times. I could just say caret 5. And who cares that it's 0 through 4? It's 5 times. That's where it usually comes up. I think it's Larry that calls the carets cat ears. That enables my favorite slide of all time. Mouse ears, bunny ears, whatever. It's a great design. It fixes a huge pain point when you're using Python, where all the ranges are 0 to, but not including whatever number you said, if you just say a number. Okay. What the heck is that? It really does help with off by ones. It gives opportunity to code well, to be clearer to yourself and to others. Unless you're making some obscure joke about there's supposed to be 4 of the pussycats and we're off by 1. Oh, you were! Holy cow, I can't believe I Awesome. Yeah, that's actually the webcomic Menage a 3. The characters dressed up as the pussycats for something. That's why it's different than actual Josie. Okay, so I don't remember why I have this slide, but I have a note to show the source code of Rakudo about it. So I've got that. I had that. Okay. I don't know why I don't even know if that's me or Jonathan or Patrick that put that in. I'll make a note to investigate that for next year. Oh, in case you didn't know, if you want to dig into Perl, how does Perl do this? You're going to get down into C code, just really fast, which is frustrating if you don't know C. But if you want to play with Rakudo, almost all of Rakudo is written in Rakudo. And once you learn these basics of this class, you're pretty qualified to puzzle out what's going on, like how does range do this? You can just read the source code and figure it out. It's much, much more accessible to casual investigation or even contribution. And I encourage you, if you find this worth playing with in your after this class, to eventually get to where you're looking at this. Most of Rakudo is written in Rakudo. If I need to explain how bootstrapping works to you, I have had to do it before at this conference. I sat in a rocking chair in front of a fire with Soka Doa. Pardon?
extremely common in most programming languages.
Yes, it's extremely common. Well, you're asking how. Well, okay, it's extremely common, but how does it start? This is what you get. The people who already know are like, oh yeah, we do that all the time. And people that don't know, which was me for a long time, are like, how can that possibly work? But it does. You just need somebody to explain it to you. And if you care enough for me to explain it to you, I'll be glad to. But yeah, bootstrapping it will turn your brain inside out, but then it turns it back right side and you're fine.
Don't say C wasn't written in C.
Don't say that C wasn't written in C. The first C compiler was not written in C. It was written in assembler because bootstrapping. And in fairness, there are two layers of Rakudo below Rakudo. Most of it's written in Rakudo. And then that stuff runs on a layer called NQP from back when we were saying it's Perl 6. NQP is not quite Perl. So it looks like Perl. It has a lot of the features of Perl, but the key things that are really difficult to implement low level, it doesn't do. Like it doesn't have assignment. You cannot assign to a variable. But it's still a lot friendlier to work in than C. And then the layer below that is the virtual machine, which used to be Parrot back when I was working on it, and is now more VM, which is Jonathan's genius creation. Another story for a bar or a party or something. We're really lucky to have him. Anyway, so if I say, starting back the slide. If I say negative infinity, yes, we have that too. You can say capital I, lowercase nf, or you can use the cool infinity symbol from Unicode. We have negative infinity to 42. And I ask, what is it? Or just put it in the REPL. It says it's negative infinity to 42. There's nothing magic about that. Sure. And it obeys math. If I ask for the first 5 elements of this, they're all negative infinity because negative infinity plus 1 is still negative infinity. But here's the thing that shows it's not unwinding into an infinite number of things and then trying to reverse it. Oh, that's why I was supposed to show you the source code. There's source code that shows how reverse interacts with requests on, it just essentially considers the range reversed and does the operation if it has reverse after it. Is that making sense? A complete mystery? I got yeses and nos and I got to move on. But I think it's neat. And it's like, that's something that in a lot of languages, you couldn't even start saying that. And if you could say it, it would give you the wrong answer. And here, it's completely right and efficient. Questions? Okay. More about ranges. If I smart match on a range, I'm asking, is the thing in the range? So if I say 7 tilde tilde, that's a smart match operator. 1 to 9, it's essentially asking, is 7 greater than 1, or greater than or equal to, and is 7 greater than or equal to 9? So that's very useful. There's a lot of times you're saying that second line, and you'd like a short form of it, and so now you've got a short form of it. But it raises an interesting question if you think about it. If I've got a range with an exclusion, 4, but not including 4, so just shy of 4, up to 7, what does that really mean? Because I used to read it as being, 4 caret dot dot 7 is the same thing as 5 dot dot 7, right? But it's not. Because it's everything but 4 itself up. If you're talking about real numbers, 4.1 is in 4 exclusion dot dot 7. Isn't that cool? Yeah, 4 plus epsilon. So again, echoing the open and closed endpoints in algebra. Okay. So by now we should be able to do this in our heads, right? What does this first one do? What numbers does it say? 0 through 7. That's right. And if I edited both of the $A's to be $A, $B, then what would it say? And we didn't really cover that. We didn't talk about what it's going to do if that arrow block has multiple parameters. Anybody have a guess? Yes, sir. Pairs of integers. So, yes. 0, 1, and then, no, 0, 1, then 2, 3, then 4, 5. It doesn't back up. We do have a way to do that. I don't know if I cover it. It's called rotor. But it takes them 2 at a time. Wait, that sounds familiar. Remember how I said .kv sometimes is useful? Well, the syntax to unwind a pair into key and value is a little cumbersome. But if you just put 2 things on the right side of the arrow and are doing a .kv on the left side of the arrow, then you get them. You get the key, the value, key, value, key, value. But don't hit the mic. Oh, and I've got an example. Yes, you're right. It works just like that. And top part, I asked for 3 at a time, but I gave it something that's not divisible by 3. So it executes the first time. It's not looking ahead. It executes the second time. And the third time, it tries to say, hey, this takes 3. You gave it 2, and throws an exception. But sometimes that's what you want. You want it to catch that error. You thought there was going to be exactly divisible by 3. But sometimes you want it to not. So I can put a question mark, and that's optional. So now it won't fail. Unless B wouldn't be populated either, in which case it would fail. And notice, earlier we had the question about any. Well, here it went all the way up. Actually, I don't know if they changed that, but that's the undefined value at the very top, the mu, the nothingness in Zen. And some form of this was added to Perl last year in 5.36, where you can take multiple parameters in a for loop. There it is. You just have to turn on experimental for list. Wait, you're frowning. What's wrong about that? You don't want Perl to have nice things too? I'm not going to presume to know why you're frowning. I will just say that more than one person has had issues with, okay, Perl has this nice, cool thing, and A, I can't use it because I have to run older stuff on my systems, or B, I've got to support multiple systems with different versions of Perl, so I can't until I get them all on it, or I've got to train my people on this, or there's lots of reasons. But there's always reasons for happiness. And Ricardo had a great blog post on it. Okay. And I was just talking about KV. So what am I going to get there? Sarah's my wife, by the way. I know someone answered earlier about what you get with keys on a list or an array. I also know we all ate a lot of sweets at the break. Okay, so the key the first time through is 0, element 0, and the value is going to be Bruce. So I'll get 0.Bruce. And the next time, there'll be 1 and Sarah, 1.Sarah. And I printed it. Oh, because Sarah's number 1. Aren't I clever? Last year. What? Oh. That looks redundant to stuff we've already learned. Oh, I guess I'm using KV on a hash this time. We don't know what order it's going to come out in. Pardon?
Like the first say is like city's a capital country, fair enough, London's capital UK, but London's capital in UK. It's weird.
Yeah, it's wrong. It's wrong. I don't know why it's wrong. I don't know if it was my error or if there was some subtle point about the right ways and the wrong ways of doing things. I'll just assume it was my error and review it. Thank you for pointing that out. I was just like, why did I do it 3 ways? Oh, 2 of them are wrong. Missed that. So thank you. Okay. So we can do this even in places where we're not trying to. Like .kv, we always want 2 things, right? But if it just makes sense to you to get 2 at a time, you just take a straight list and take them 2 at a time. You're trying to pair up people, and gender doesn't matter, like in Argentine tango. We can use .pick. .pick didn't talk about that. Cool bit. It does a random selection from a list. And if you want to shuffle the list, you just say pick all of them at once, and it gives them all to you. So you don't get any repeats. It's just like it's shuffled. But this will fail if there's an odd number of dancers. But I could then put a question mark there. And it says we'll soon discover that the pointing arguments are just a special case of Raku signatures. But I don't know how that's relevant at this point. Okay, back to ranges. We can do more magic with them. What happens if you add 12 to the range 5 to 8? Guesses? Does it change the last endpoint? The first endpoint? The whole range? Yes, it changes the whole range. If you put it in parens. What's the precedence of the dot dot versus the plus? You see? I don't have a slide. Oh, this is a try it and see. Somebody try it and see. And tell me, do you get 2 different answers for the top one and the bottom one? I mean, the top one and the second one. Because I'm remembering that without the parens, it's 5 dot dot a plus 12. But with the parens, of course, the addition happens on the whole range. Yeah, I'm right. Okay, great. And if you multiply by 3, but what are the actual numbers? 15 to 24. Okay. And if you divide by 12? Yeah? So it goes from 5/12 to 2/3, which you can't iterate over, but you can test for, is something a member of that range, if it falls in those endpoints. And what if we add these 2 ranges together? You get 6. Why would you get 6? Because you can't add a range to a range as ranges. It doesn't make sense, or it's not defined. So it says, what's the number of elements on one side, a number of elements on the other, and does that. This is something that bites people on occasion. I don't have a good example of it. In fact, when I wrote that, I didn't even think that it was connected. But there are some times where you use an array or list where it doesn't make any sense to Raku. It might make sense to you, but it doesn't make sense to Raku to do a math operation on the whole list. And so it silently converts the list into the number of elements. I think it ought to warn, but it doesn't. So if you ask for the sign of this list of three things, it does not give you the sign of those three things. It gives you the sign of three without a warning. That apparently is especially biting people who are coming to Raku from the R language, where everything always works over all the elements. I imagine it would work similarly for people coming from J and APL. Okay, let's just talk about what this triadency is. So create a file with various words in it, loop over it with a for. Use a hash to count how many times you've seen each word, and then go over the hash to see how many times each word is seen. I'm going to say, if anyone wants to do that at home, I encourage you to, but because we don't have a lot of people who are pair programming, like the first time this class was given, we had, I think, 4 or maybe 5 people as runners. So Patrick was teaching I wasn't at the very first time, but first time Patrick taught it. It was a packed room. There had to be 50, 60 people in that room. And they were pair programming, and we had Raku experts who'd raise a hand and we could come help out with something without interrupting Patrick's flow. So these are more applicable to that kind of situation. Subs and signatures. We will have several ways to write callable code. I touched on this in my sorting talk. The different ways are appropriate for different situations, but they look rather different. Even as a beginner, you might have a use for all of them. We'll start with the basic subroutines, and then we'll go into the details of the other callables. So this is basic subroutine, which is very similar to how Perl is now in 536, now that we've added signatures. We added it before 536. They just weren't turned on, except experimental. Now, in 536, they're on. Just say use 536, V536. So, partner is a parameter we're going to call dance with, and it will say dancing with that person. The keyword is sub. That's defining a subroutine, unlike JavaScript and some other languages where you start with the name and then say what the name is. We have an action. We're defining a subroutine. Clearer to me. We got the name of the subroutine and a parameter list in parentheses. The technical name for a parameter list is signature. It's important to know that if you're looking for stuff about how you pass all this in the documentation. The keyword is signature. It's even a type. We have a type called signature. You can introspect. So I call it with the argument Sarah. And by the way, that's not Raku not Raku terminology. That's general programming terminology. If you're talking about the subroutine, that's a parameter. Parameter list, parameter is the thing that will get passed. When you actually pass it, you call it an argument. So the top part that's a parameter, but where I fill it in the actual call, that's the argument. So what's that going to do? Guesses? What's it going to do? We've got one parameter and 2 arguments, so it's either going to blow up or just use the first one. That's correct. It will do one of those two things. That's a good guess. I want it to throw an error. In Perl, if you're using the @_ method and you don't specifically check for how many things were in @_, this is a common bug that you want one parameter and somebody passes you 14 parameters and it's silent. It just throws away the other 13. You never know anything went wrong. Here, it doesn't just say you were supposed to have two parameters, one parameter and you gave it two. It says you're calling it with two. That will never work with the signature of one. Gives you the types of what you called it with, because that signature might then say, and this is a different type that you needed to give it. In this case, it's just the arity. Yes, you can say, I could say in front of $partner, I can say stir, like capital STR, partner. Just like when we were defining a variable, we say my and a type, my and a type and the variable. Here we can just put the type before the variable, and it will let you know, it will halt if it's the wrong type. So we've already seen pointy blocks go with for, while, and if. But if you just have a pointer block without any of that, you don't say while, you don't say for, you just start with the pointy. You're also creating a callable. That's freaky when you first look at it. But what's in greeter after that statement finishes, we don't technically call it a subroutine, but it's a subroutine. It's a block that you can call that takes parameters. It works like a subroutine. It's anonymous. It doesn't have a name. It's stored in a variable, but it's callable code. And there I call it, and it works just like I had written it as a subroutine. And there's an even more convenient third way. Oops. I don't think I'm saying that next, though. Maybe I'm missing a slide. I'll come back to it if I need to. What time are we going to? 5:30. Okay. So 30 more minutes. Okay. All right. Oh, yeah, I remember that. Well, we'll see if there's questions. Oh, and I have prizes for you. You might ask on Slack, because one of them's one time is on the second floor, which we haven't been to yet. So please ask on Slack. Okay, so skipping over the easier way. Once we have a subroutine and declared a sub, once we've declared the sub, you can call it with parens or without parens if it's previously declared. I think if it's not previously declared, you have to use parens for the forward reference. And this will trip you up. They normalize this part of the syntax. Identifier immediately followed by open paren, something, close paren, is always a function call. Always, 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 even if that word is something you think of as a keyword. Pardon? So if you say, if and define if, now you can call if with parens, as long as there's no spaces in between the if and the paren. But what will get you is sometime you won't have done that crazy thing. Who would do that? You'll just accidentally say, oh, well, if I don't need parens, but I put them in. It looks better. I'm used to it. Everybody else needs it. So but you leave out the space in between if and the parens in a real if block. And it tries to do a subroutine call to a missing subroutine called if. That's how it bites most people. Because the rule is, if there isn't a space there, it's a subroutine call. It is, but that doesn't matter because this is more important than keywords. It outranks the keywords. I won't even go into it that we don't have keywords. So the other thing that will get you is if you have a legitimate subroutine that you are trying to call, but you do put in a space, then you have not done what you think you were doing. So that very last line, say substir, okay, that's a function, so it should take an immediate open paren, but we put in a space, and we've got two things in parens. Well, two things in parens, if they're just standalone parens, makes a list of two things. And by the rule we did earlier, at the bottom, list op form, you don't have to have parens. A space means pass all the other stuff to it. That means that substir gets passed one argument that is a list of two elements, which is nonsensical. Oh, no. Guifa says there's a module for that. Yes, we have slangs. We have all as fairs. If you pre-declare, you can actually change the syntax of Raku locally in a lexical scope. I have not played with it. Would you like to tell us what that module name is?
I forget. I discuss it when I talk tomorrow.
Guifa says he forgets, but he will discuss it in his talk tomorrow, which is titled what? Slang colons toxic. That's your talk, or that's the thing?
No,
that's the module name. Okay, Ingi.
The mixer might be the same place where they're having fluid.
On L2.
Outside the plenary.
Okay.
Probably wrap up at 5:25.
I should wrap up because it's 5:25?
No, it's 5:25.
So you don't miss any food at all.
I mean, you can go as long as you want.
But you're going. Okay. All right. Well, all right. Since there may be quite a gap in between when I finish material and when everybody wants to depart, let me do this first. From back before we renamed it to Raku, it's still Perl 6, we had these nice badges that were donated as donation incentives. So you would get one if you donated $50 towards the development of Raku, with Perl 6 back then. And that program was discontinued. We had extra badges, and they've been gifted to me as gifts to people that passed this class. Passing being attending.
Yes, listen to say.
Yes, there is no final test. I'm trying to do a joke from the end of The Good Place where there is no test and you all failed. But so if you think you want it, or you're worthy, or you have a place to wear it, or you know somebody that would appreciate it. Does it fly like a frisbee? I have not tried. I'm not going to try, but you can try after my class. I'm going to leave them. No, tell you what.
So you have the soda song. Was it stick? There's a pause.
I have no idea what I'm talking about now, but we still got time, and you still have patience. I still have talking. Teaching, not just talking. Okay, so this explains what I just explained of why it goes wrong. That really deserves a slide. I said there are 4 different ways of defining code. They are all subtly different. They don't just have different use cases. They have slightly different restrictions or abilities. And one of the restrictions of a pointy block is it's transparent to return. So if you had a subroutine and you execute a return statement, then it exits the subroutine carrying that value. But if you're using a pointy block, even though I said it does the same thing, if you return inside a pointy block, then it returns from the surrounding scope. It doesn't return from just the pointy block, which is exactly what you want. And I don't have the illustration, but imagine, if you haven't seen it already, a for loop is a pointy block. And you want to be able to say for whatever. And when I find this, I want to, okay, this element is equal to the thing I'm looking for. Return true, I found it. You want that return to kick out of the surrounding block. You don't want it to just exit the for loop. That's what leave is for, right? So that's why there's a difference there. There's no good reason why it's not clear on the slide. Okay, you want to pass arrays or hashes. In Perl, everything flattens. In Raku, nothing flattens unless you make it with a hammer. So I can legitimately say, give me 2 lists, top line, and third line from the bottom, call it with 2 lists. I don't have to put backslashes in front of it. It knows I want 2 things. I'm passing it 2 things. The things happen to be arrays. So that's valid. And if I inspect it, then I see that they contain what you would expect. By the way, that is a tricky shortcut to extend the Raku thing that I talked about before. If you use DD, you really don't need it, but I don't like DD for complicated reasons. So I'm putting a colon in front of the variable names that turns it into a pair where the name is the name of the variable. I haven't gotten into named parameters, but that's the syntax for it. It's just a easy thing to remember. Put a colon in front of it, you will get the name in the output. Okay, I said this earlier. Very consistent. Argument is what you're passing. Argument list is the list of things you're passing. Parameter is the thing that gets the argument. And parameter list is called a signature. Even though I keep calling it a parameter list, in our docs, it's a signature. And it says, why do we call it a signature instead of a parameter list? Because signature and parameter are both object classes, types. We can ask things like, is this sub's second parameter required? You can introspect at that level. We try and stick to official terms in error messages and documentation. Well, so it's worth getting clear on it if you're going to be deep in this. Okay. Again, I will not get you to try it. I'll just tell you. If the compiler can tell at compile time that a call that you've had in your code can't possibly work, it will not compile. That's an advance. It doesn't have to fail at runtime when you try to compile it. When you try to run it, because that would depend on your test code actually executing that line. It can say, hey, you're calling substring with 15 arguments. It takes 2 or 3. Fail. Also, it can find bad subroutine calls, like typos in the names, at compile time. Well, in some circumstances. I can't get into that now. All right. Refactor the word frequency that we didn't do earlier into calculate frequencies and display frequencies. Oh, this is worthwhile for the next 10 minutes. No, 15, because I can go until my time's over, and you can leave early if you want. Anybody read the book Higher Order Perl by Mark Jason Dominus? 1? Okay. 2. 3. Great. Pardon? I thought you just said I wrote parts. Yes, it is a great book. Unfortunately, a whole lot of what he does in it, he even made a complaint about it in writing the book. The syntax of Perl is not particularly friendly to the level of functional programming that he was trying to introduce. It's just the syntax that was so wordy. It took up so much of the book in code examples. And Raku has fantastic syntax for it. I've got a note here. Jonathan and Patrick have a section here on building your own object classes. And Raku has top-notch support for OO. But I put this section on functional programming because it's more important to Raku-ishness. So you can read it in the slides or maybe get to it later. Except we won't because break soon. Okay, so this is kind of functional programming that we had in Perl. We've got it in Raku too. grep is a selector. The major difference there is we're using the divisibility operator almost, and you have to have a comma. Perl's syntax is weird. You don't put the comma. It's an error to put the comma in Perl. But to be syntactically regular, grep takes two things. It takes code and a list of things to operate the code on. So there has to be a comma in between those parameters. So that's why the comma's there. I told you earlier, if you define an operator, every infix operator, it automatically gets operator equals too. Well, Boolean operators get a bang version. So you can actually say, instead of not equal, like bang equal, you can say bang equal equal. It means the same thing. But in this case, we want to say if it's not divisible by 2. Optional parameters. We did that. Same example. Yeah. You've got an XXX comment. No. Another way to make a parameter optional is to supply a default. We can do it with the subroutine, as we did at the bottom, says logged equals occurred. Oh, how brilliant is that? It doesn't have to be a fixed assignment. I can make it equal to a parameter earlier in the parameter list. I forgot about that. That's slick. So now is the instant object of what time is it right now? Shortcut. So this takes 1, 2, or 3 parameters. If I give it 2, the third one's the same as the second one. Is that clear enough? What people forget is you can do, I forget that you can do it with equal sign on a arrow block. Up in the dancer's pick line, you can make a default for one of the parameters. If you think about it, it has to be the last parameters. Like if you have 3 parameters, it can't be a default on the second, because how would that work? But you can make it the last 3 or whatever. And that makes sense. Whoever's the odd person out dances with the teacher. We also have named parameters and named arguments. And I won't really get into that, but you will see it some if you use a lot of the built-ins, like I'm failing, but there are several things that, like minimum. I want the minimum thing in this list. Well, do you mean minimum by its numeric or string or by the square root of it? Where you can give it a by subroutine and you do it with a colon by form. This is working out perfect because my voice is going just as I'm running out of things to talk about. So I'll skip all that. Slurp. Oh yeah, you can do it like Perl does it and say, give me the rest of the arguments right here. Just dump them all into this array. That's called slurpy, and you put a star in front of it. And the opposite of that is flattening in the argument list. That's not a beginner thing. Why do they have that in there? No, I added that. Why did I add that in there? Code arguments have already implied. Oh, I told you can have is read write. You can do that on a subroutine too. If you actually want to change the thing that was called, like the input output, in out parameters in the Windows API. But usually you don't want to do that. But sometimes you do want to mess with what they sent. You don't want it to be read only because it'll blow up if you try and change it. You want to change it. You don't want to have a different name. Say is copy, and it'll make a copy of it. And you can mess with the copy all you want. It will not affect the parameter, the argument passed in. Okay, not doing the OO stuff, but I'll tell you. Well, no, I won't tell you. I like the OO stuff, and I don't like OO particularly, but I think it's very well designed. I don't know what Curtis is going to say about the new classes in Perl, so I can't really compare them. But I can say that I know it was somewhat influenced by the Raku design, and that's got to be a good thing. Funny quote about OO. The guy that founded it says, all y'all are wrong about OO. Okay. So to go further, anybody actually going to go further with this? Just even if you vaguely think you're going to be playing with this, wave your hand. Honesty. Love it. Mostly the people who are already familiar with it and a little bit of the newcomers. I hope this hasn't been a waste of your time, but these are the key resources. Our doc site, I have an example site, raku.org. Do I have? Okay. And there's a site called Rosetta Code, which you should really be looking at, even if you only work in Perl, because it's got like solutions, the way you would honestly write it in the language of like 80 languages and 300 different problems. Do I know if there's a talk about Rosetta Code at this conference? I have heard that Ingi is going to be talking about something tangential maybe, or maybe directly on. I'm not quite clear, but I'm absolutely sure if Ingi's talking about it, it's worth seeing. We have IRC channels and Discord and a mailing list and questions that for some reason you haven't asked before now. Okay. The question is, why is an argument called an argument even? And I'm wondering, are you trying to start an argument?
No, this is the first time like 18 years ago that I heard that. I was like, why did somebody try something, pass so many arguments? Something like, what are we arguing about? What is this argument? It is the word. It just doesn't make sense.
Okay. Yeah. Alan is saying, and what I was about to say, I believe it's something from mathematics. I think long before computers, we talked about the input to functions. So there's a mathematical object called a function as arguments. And I will say it. I can't remember who talks about it, but somebody famous talks about in math suitcase words that they have a lot of baggage with them because they're used in different contexts. And if you use something in pure math, like imaginary number, that's a big suitcase thing. That's the wrong word. We have an idea about what imaginary means from English. That's not at all what it means in mathematics. So the math teachers that in high school that say, okay, I have to teach you this, but it's complete BS. It's not real. No, you misunderstood what imaginary means in this context because it's a different context. It's a suitcase word. So in this case, I think argument is a suitcase word. And I don't think I've won this argument, but I hope I've at least informed
The
you.
reason why function parameters are often called arguments is because they are the values that are being argued over or discussed in the function.
Okay. Where did you read that so I don't have to read it verbatim? Oh God, you asked an AI. Okay, it's math. Let's just say it's math. And for those of you who haven't seen it, look up Monty Python's argument sketch because it's funny. Other questions?
We go drink now?
I will not respond to the question about can we go drink now, because you could always go drink, but I have 4 minutes and 15 seconds. Yes.
Does Raku have immutable data types? Like actions and arrays?
Does Raku have immutable data types?
Collections do.
Yeah. Collections. Close. Okay. They have immutable data types like a set. We have a set that is immutable and a set hash that is mutable. Arrays, we have lists, which is the immutable version of an array. And for hashes, it's called a map, which is confusing, but that again, that's from, those are immutable, but
You can add a key and it gives you a new immutable.
that's what I'm getting at is, the stuff you would read about, in whatever that book is on, immutable data structures that took over the Haskell world. They're not deeply immutable. It's not automatic that every aspect of what you have put in it is also immutable. Just the top layer is guaranteed to be immutable.
I'm sorry.
I didn't even notice. That's a good question. I have been annoyed at not having completely deeply immutable structure sometimes, because once I got used to, this is a level of safety. I make this immutable. I can't accidentally modify it. No one else can either. But you can't guarantee that it's safe all the way down.
And when you do this,
Okay, if you copy, is it a deep copy? Parallel question. By default, no, never, no. You can do it yourself. And there is a .clone method that I have not looked into deeply enough. So I can't tell if if it does a deep clone or if it has a parameter to say do a deep clone or some kind of recursion. I haven't looked at it. It's a good question. And I ought to know the answer, but if you want to explore it, clone is the method I would look up to find out. What else? All right. Last thing. Would you recommend that this get another 4-hour slot next year for people who are new to the conference? Or do you think 2 years in a row, let's take a year off? I mean, good grief, you had other talks in the slot. I won't oblige you to tell me now, but that's my email. And we're all going to the same party together. So please let me hear from you one way or another. I want feedback because I don't know what to do otherwise. I might speak on something you don't want to hear about. And if you don't think we should do this, tell me what you think we should do instead. Because we're listening. That's my email. The slides that are up there right now are good enough, but there will be slides from exactly this talk that are practically identical. Okay. Thank you all.